Hello, everyone, and welcome to Disaster Recovery for Mission Critical PeopleSoft. That it's for PeopleSoft, that it's a must-have, not a nice-to-have. I am Scott Lavery, head of marketing here at Apcian, and I'm joined with Arvind Rajan, who'll be doing our presentation today. Certainly appreciate everyone's participation here at the PeopleSoft Innovation Summit. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Everyone is on mute. The session is being recorded and will be posted to the registration landing page for free on-demand viewing within the next week. It will also be posted to the PeopleSoft Summit's official YouTube page. So if you're a YouTube user, I certainly suggest you go and subscribe to that, as that's where all the videos will also go. The session is 60 minutes and will also include a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the questions section of the control panel on the right side of your screen. So with that, I will now turn things over to Arvind to begin today's presentation. Arvind?
Thank you so much, Scott, and welcome everybody. My name is Arvind Rajan, and for those of you who were part of the keynote, you heard me introduce myself, but for those of you who were not able to join us in the keynote, welcome to this session. My name is Arvind Rajan. I'm co-founder and CEO of Astute Business Solutions, and I'm here to talk about disaster recovery for your mission-critical PeopleSoft applications, why that is a must-have and not a nice-to-have. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So I'll spend a couple of minutes introducing Astute Business Solutions. We've been in business for 15 years, and we are all ex-PeopleSoft. So we worked for PeopleSoft prior to the Oracle acquisition. So you can think of PeopleSoft as being in our DNA, and it's core to a lot of the things that we do in our organization, even when we work on cloud projects. We've completed over 35 successful PeopleSoft cloud migrations, and really excited about the benefits that we've been able to deliver to all of our customers. You heard Swaps Mohanty from Hennepin County and Anthony Bertani from Heidrick & Struggles earlier today talk about their experiences with Oracle Cloud, and those were some of our customer success stories. As a company, we are offering services on PeopleSoft migration to Oracle Cloud, Illusion Banner migration to cloud, Oracle e-Business Suite migrations, disaster recovery, which I'm here to talk to you about, and a whole host of cloud platform-based solutions, including chatbots, integration cloud, analytics in the cloud with Oracle Analytics Cloud, robotic process automation with Automation Anywhere, and Exadata migrations to Exadata Cloud Service. Here's a little bit about our experience in the cloud. I'm going to talk to you today about disaster recovery, not just as a solution for PeopleSoft, but how disaster recovery works in the cloud. And this is a little bit about our experience both in the commercial and public sector space, some of our customers for whom we've successfully implemented similar solutions. All right, so let's talk about disaster recovery. I felt it was important for us to get on the same page when we talk about DR, before we talk about solutions and how things work with disaster recovery, why disaster recovery for PeopleSoft, why in the cloud, etc. I think that has to come later. First, we all have to understand what disaster recovery means and get on the same page in terms of defining disaster recovery. So I'll start by giving you this definition from Wikipedia. And disaster recovery involves a set of policies, tools, and procedures to enable the recovery or continuation of vital technology infrastructure and systems following a natural or human-induced disaster. And I deliberately highlighted a couple of things here. So the first part, if you see, that's underlined in and highlighted and in bold, in our policies, tools, and procedures. So disaster recovery is not just about having technology, as in, I have this standby system, I have this extra piece of hardware, and that's my disaster recovery solution. That plus the policies and procedures make up a complete disaster recovery solution. And the second thing that you see underlined and in red text, which is really important for all of us to acknowledge, is following a natural or human-induced disaster. And the reason why we're talking about natural or is because disaster recovery is no longer just about protecting against a storm or flooding or earthquakes or power outages. But it's also about protecting your environment and your critical applications like PeopleSoft against human-induced disasters. It could be internal threats, external threats, hacks, ransomware attacks, and a number of other possibilities. So it's a scary world we live in, but the good news is there are lots of tools and technologies available to help us protect against these things. Talking about natural disasters and power outages, shout out to all the folks out in Texas who are dealing with power outages since Sunday, I believe, because of the unusual snow situation over there. So I have several team members over there, and we know they're just slowly limping back to normal. So hopefully things get better there soon. So there are some key terms in disaster recovery that I think everybody should be familiar with if you're not already familiar with it. And the two main things that you will see in disaster recovery are RTO, recovery time objective, and RPO, recovery point objective. So recovery time objective, and you can see that little graphic on the side. It talks about, RPO and RTO and where it plays a role in the context of a disaster. The disaster is the little flaming thing in the middle of the line over there. So recovery time objective is really how the time taken to get your application up and running again in your DR site or in a secondary location after disaster strikes. So how much time elapses from the time disaster strikes to the time your application is up and running in your disaster recovery site. And this is really something that the customer has to define, because you have to be able to say, how long can I afford to be without my PeopleSoft application up and running? And that really defines the RTO metric when you set up a disaster recovery solution. And this is true whether you're setting up disaster recovery by yourself or whether you're using a partner solution or a fully managed solution in the cloud. You still have to have a definition of RTO. You can take a standard RTO service level agreement that a cloud provider or a service provider like Astute can give you, or you can say, no, that's not good enough, I need something better. And you can say, I cannot afford any downtime, so I want my RTO to be zero, and that's possible too. There are solutions that can give you zero recovery time objective. Recovery point objective talks about how many transactions you can stand to lose when disaster occurs. And this really is about the time that it takes to back up your system and restore, and comparing that with when disaster strikes. If you have real-time standbys, real-time replications, and other tools and technologies in place, again, you can build a solution that gives you zero loss of data, and you can be up and running in a standby system in a matter of minutes. Or if you're not looking at a very sophisticated solution and you can afford to live with maybe up to an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours of transaction loss, and you can rekey that in, because again, we'll talk about the cost parameters in a later stage on this presentation, but all of these solutions also have a cost parameter and a risk parameter. So, but these are the terms that you need to be familiar with, RTO and RPO. This will factor in all disaster recovery solutions and conversations. The next thing that we can talk about is what qualifies as a disaster recovery solution. We talk to customers every day about disaster recovery, about their current state of PeopleSoft applications, whether or not they're going to migrate it to cloud. And disaster recovery always factors in those discussions. And we ask the question, do you have disaster recovery in place for PeopleSoft? And we get a variety of answers. We don't just get one answer. So a lot of customers will tell us, yes, they have disaster recovery, but they'll say, we have backups. And backups are not disaster recovery, and I'll explain why. Some customers say, we have backups, but we put our backups in the cloud, so we are not at risk of losing backups. If a disk fails on-prem, it's in the cloud, so it's always available. But that's still, sending a backup to the cloud is really not a true DR solution. Some customers are a little more sophisticated. They have their own data centers, or they have colo facilities and multiple facilities. So they'll say, my primary facility has my production environment, and in the secondary region or facility in the data center, I have standby infrastructure or hardware, but that may not be fully configured or fully in sync. So that also, while that's good to have, it's not really a true DR solution. So when you think about disaster recovery for a mission-critical application like PeopleSoft, it has to be a full-stack PeopleSoft environment on standby in a secondary data center. So if your primary data center is hit by an outage, you have a snow situation, a blizzard, or a hurricane, or a power outage, or an earthquake, whatever this may be, or human-induced disasters like a malware attack or a hack into your system, you need a secondary environment in which PeopleSoft is running with a full stack. And what do we mean by full stack? It's not just a database that's being replicated. It's not just backups that are put in a secondary location. You have the production stack, web server, application server, process scheduler, search, database, all the components that you're running today in a secondary data center, up and running and continuously synced with your production environment, tested and maintained, because if you apply security fixes in production, if you make changes to your code and configuration, those have to be replicated as well. And as I said in my DR definition, it's not just about having the technology, i.e. the systems in place, but having a robust DR plan to execute the failover when disaster strikes, right? So that is what a true disaster recovery solution is. Now, we understand that customers, due to various reasons, may not have this and may only have backups or may only have a standby system, may not have full stack. But I think in the context of today's presentation and talking about disaster recovery, it's important to acknowledge that a true disaster recovery solution has all of these elements. So here are some sample solutions that customers can consider, and I'll go into detail about how these solutions can be implemented. But you can have backups, you can tolerate a certain amount of downtime and data loss. You can have a cold standby, you can have lesser downtime and lesser data loss, or you can have a warm standby. And as it indicates, cold and warm. Warm means it's up and running, it is syncing data, and as a result, you get lower downtime and faster recovery. So you remember we spoke about RTO and RPO. As you go from backup to cold to warm, your RTO and RPO SLA metrics improve, which means you get better recovery times and lesser data loss. And you can always go to 0 if you'd like to do that. So disaster recovery, while today's topic is about PeopleSoft applications and disaster recovery, it does not have to be limited to PeopleSoft applications alone. Disaster recovery can apply to all the applications that you have in your IT portfolio today. Packaged applications, custom applications, databases that are not running packaged applications, but you may have Oracle databases or SQL Server databases that are supporting custom applications, warehouses, and so on and so forth. You could have a number of different applications, but all of them may require disaster recovery. Some of them may be higher in the priority list compared to others. So PeopleSoft, for example, if you're a higher education customer today, Campus Solutions, Finance, and HR form the backbone of your student information, student records, and all of the administrative processes that go along with that. So that may be higher in your priority list than, let's say, a housing application. I don't know, just a thought there. So you may have different ways of prioritizing that. But you can look at that as applications that are not critical, applications that are critical, and applications that are extremely critical. And if you start on the right, applications that are extremely critical are the ones that are critical for running your business. Without those, your business comes to a grinding halt, and you cannot do that. So, for example, if you're using PeopleSoft Financials and Supply Chain, and all of your procurement for goods and services runs through that system, then, and you are, let's say, a healthcare provider using PeopleSoft for procurement, and if you cannot procure goods and you supply and replenish inventory in your hospitals, then essentially you're down. You cannot provide essential services. So I would consider that as an extremely critical application. There may be some examples of applications that are not extremely critical, but critical, and then some that are non-critical. For each of these, you can apply a different type of disaster recovery solution, depending on the criticality, right? You can go from backup to pilot light to active standby, and a completely active system where it's continuously in sync. And as you can see, the RPO, RTO parameters and the cost parameters and the complexity of those solutions vary greatly between each of those things. What we find is that when it comes to disaster recovery as an org-wide solution, customers have to look at all of these possibilities and not just think of a one-size-fits-all for disaster recovery. Even within your PeopleSoft application portfolio, for those of you running multiple PeopleSoft applications, you may find that you have to designate one of those PeopleSoft applications as extremely critical and another one as just critical, for example. So it's important to understand the categorization and then apply the appropriate solutions for disaster recovery based on that. So Oracle has a number of cloud offerings for disaster recovery, and you can compare and contrast these based on cost and effort and also data loss and downtime. Again, data loss and downtime corresponding to RPO and RTO, right? So active, which means a parallel production site. You have the infrastructure in the parallel site or in the disaster recovery site. Every transaction is replicated to that parallel site, and you can get to zero downtime and zero data loss with an active solution. And for those of you who cannot afford any data loss and any downtime, this is the solution that you really want for disaster recovery. For those of you who are willing to live with a solution that is less stringent in terms of RPO and RTO, you can consider an active passive solution. And that is, the application is on full standby, it's ready to run, and it is not syncing in real time as an active solution, but it is writing the transaction to the standby system after it writes to the production system. And it will probably give you a certain data loss and that you'll have to live with, but that's something that you make a decision on, and that's a solution for you. The pilot-like solution is a lower cost solution, but also a lower solution in terms of the capability that it offers. It protects your data with a low RPO replication, so your process recovery point objective is still low, but you still have to bring the systems up and scale them up to full capacity, because as you can think of the pilot light analogy, the pilot light is always lit in your fireplace or in your heater, but it only starts heating when you turn the heater on and you turn the fireplace on, right? So you're supplying the fuel for that. So that's the analogy here. The pilot light means there's a small footprint that's up and running, and it's not a production footprint. It's not what you would call my system's up and running in the DR site, but it gives you all the mechanics to take that pilot system and scale it to a full-size production environment when the disaster strikes. So there is obviously some time involved in scaling that up, and we'll talk about how you can minimize that time through automation and with Oracle Cloud. The last one is backup to cloud. Not something we would recommend you do when you think about true DR for your mission-critical applications, but we understand that several customers are doing this today, and their way of protecting PeopleSoft and having a standby system relies entirely on backups, which means you don't have server provision, you don't have the full stack up and running. You'll take the backup, you'll build it from scratch with a new environment, and obviously that would take longer to build and activate than any of the other offerings that you see above that. Okay, so now let's talk about why DR. So we spoke about what DR is, what the definition is, what qualifies as a true DR solution and what does not, and what are some of the DR metrics and solutions you can consider applying based on the criticality of your workload. Now let's talk about DR for PeopleSoft, why it's a must-have and why you cannot ignore DR as a requirement anymore. It's not a nice-to-have solution. So customers have put off implementing a true DR solution for PeopleSoft for various reasons, but these are the top 3 reasons that I thought I could share with you based on all the interactions we've had with customers filling out surveys and interacting with us through our website and other means. Customers perceive DR to be costly to build and maintain, and this is true. In the on-premise world, if you have a primary data center and a secondary data center, building a DR solution has always meant having a mirrored production infrastructure stack along with all the software and operational support needed in a secondary data center, which meant that if your production environment costs you $100,000 a year, you were spending $100,000 a year in infrastructure, software, and maintenance and facilities in the parallel site. So that itself led to DR being costly. Now, it's not just about the hardware and software, it's also about installing it, maintaining it, patching it, securing it. So all the operational overhead that go along with a production system were also applicable to the DR system. So DR was costly to build and maintain. The second thing that we hear customers say and customers believe in is DR was perceived as low risk. So they would say, PeopleSoft is a back office application. It's not on our front end. It's not a consumer facing application. And, we really don't think hackers can get past our firewall and attack it and get into the database and things like that. Now, we know that that's not true anymore, right? Hackers are getting more sophisticated by the day, and they are very brazen in their attacks on organizations. And they've proven pretty much that they can get to any system if they want to, if your security and defenses are not up to the latest and greatest in terms of technology. So this has been proven wrong. Now, even in terms of natural disasters, thinking about the snow situation in Texas and the power outage that caused, normally if you're living in Texas, you would not really think of snow as a natural disaster that you need to account for, right? It's a freak accident and it can occur only once in every so many years. But if that happens, and if you're dealing with power outages for a few days and your systems are offline, is that an acceptable risk and can you live with that? So it has been proven wrong where DR is no longer a low risk solution category element. It is something of high risk. And there's been plenty of examples about that. The last thing is DR, implementing and supporting disaster recovery has been labor intensive. So here we're talking about the human effort that goes into procuring, implementing, maintaining, and supporting a DR solution. And that is true. It is not fully automated for most of you in the on-premise world, and it does require quite a bit of human intervention to support and maintain. The way to also look at DR and why DR is a must-have and not a nice-to-have is talk about what are the costs and risks of not having disaster recovery for your PeopleSoft applications. And I just put this in two simple columns. Of course, this is not a comprehensive list. If the audience has more thoughts on this, feel free to share that through chat. If you have questions on this, happy to take that towards the end of the presentation. But if you are unable to ship product, if you're unable to requisition goods and services, if you're unable to pay your suppliers, if you're unable to pay your employees, process payroll, God forbid a disaster hits when you have open enrollment for HR, for employees, for benefits, or you have student enrollment at the beginning of a semester, are these things you can live with, and what is the cost of not having these services that you deliver through your PeopleSoft application? Most cost estimates that you'll find online through customer surveys and other scholarly articles put the estimate anywhere between hundreds of thousands to tens or hundreds of millions, depending on the size of the organization, depending on the size of the disaster. And oftentimes customers don't think about that, about the cost of not having DR. We commonly refer to that as cost avoidance, is by having a solution in place for DR, what are the costs that you can avoid? Now, on the risk side, you'll find if you are not up and running 24/7, then are you losing competitive advantage? Are you losing trust with your employees and customers and suppliers because they no longer can rely on you providing a system that's available when they need it? And are you able to fully recover? There's an interesting article that I read, then I can put that in the chat later on if I find some time, about how customers who have experienced a large-scale disaster recovery event, what is the total rate of failure among those customers in the next 3 to 5 years? And a number of those businesses have actually continued to have failures and have not been able to fully recover from that. So that's something to keep in mind. And then for those of you who are in regulated industries and who have to meet government compliance, legislative compliance requirements, data privacy compliance requirements, and all of that, can you afford to handle that risk of not having a fully compliant system in your DR environment? That's not just a standby tech stack, but meets all of your compliance requirements as well, your security requirements as well. So these are important things for businesses to think about when they think about disaster recovery for mission-critical applications like PeopleSoft. Now, the next two slides, I'm going to share with you some information that I've collected from different sources. This particular one is from Deloitte, and it is from 2019. I know 2019 seems like such a long time ago, but the data is still relevant. And what this shows us is, over the years, ransomware attacks have just spiked. And in 20, we don't know what the numbers are for 2020 yet. I'm sure they'll announce it. But as you can see, there's been a steady increase in ransomware attacks. And this particularly talks about governments. And we know a lot of city and county and state governments and federal agencies use PeopleSoft as their enterprise applications. And they're dealing with ransomware attacks quite often. So disaster recovery can be a form of protection against ransomware attacks. Think of it as cybersecurity insurance, where if your primary system is compromised, then rather than being held ransom to recover that system, you can rely on a disaster recovery solution. That's, of course, secure. We'll have to talk about things like air gapping that system from your primary environment so that the ransomware attack does not automatically spill over. But there is a way to do all of that with disaster recovery, and we'll talk about how cloud makes that better as well. The second thing I wanted to show you was this survey, and I pulled this from Educause. This was a survey of some higher ed customers, and disaster recovery during COVID time. So we were talking about how many customers actually have disaster recovery implemented. And I think they surveyed somewhere between 500 and 700 people for this. So only 42% of customers said that they have a formal disaster recovery and business continuity plan. That's what DR/DC stands for. Of that 42%, only 50% actually had implemented the disaster recovery plan that was on paper. So now we're dealing with a much smaller number. And of that, of the 50% who had actually implemented it, only 33% said that they had the staff to maintain and operate that, which means that it's not just enough to implement disaster recovery, but if you don't maintain and operate it, then that system is of no use. Your disaster recovery solution is not reliable. It cannot be brought up during your actual disaster event within the specified RPO and RTO metrics. And lastly, only 17% of that 33% claim that they could actually carry out routine tests to see whether disaster recovery is working or not, which means failing over to the DR site, running PeopleSoft production there, testing everything, entering transactions, failing back to the production site. Now, that's an involved process. It's not easy, but it must be done if you have to have a reliable disaster recovery solution. So this is just to show you, I was talking about some of the challenges associated with disaster recovery. All of those things around cost, human effort, the technology spend, all of that has contributed to these kinds of metrics that you see. And there's a link to that survey. I'll make this presentation available for those of you who want to read the full survey and the results of that. So now let's talk about how disaster recovery on Oracle Cloud for PeopleSoft applications can solve these problems for you. And there are many things that we can talk about in terms of cloud, but what you heard in the keynote today from Vish and Craig, what you heard in the customer panel and in the roundtable discussion was there are several features and capabilities on Oracle Cloud that make it very unique for PeopleSoft applications. So Oracle is in a way purpose-built for PeopleSoft and other Oracle apps workloads, and Oracle database obviously offers you significant advantages on Oracle Cloud. But for those PeopleSoft customers who are running PeopleSoft on Microsoft SQL Server, you still have several advantages, and I'll talk about what those are when you implement disaster recovery on Oracle Cloud. So disaster recovery on Oracle Cloud, you should think of this as a way to address several challenges, right? The first one is the economics part of it, which is, can I spend less on disaster recovery while still getting a full DR solution? If you remember the slide where we had the green checkbox on what qualifies for a true disaster recovery solution. So going from where you are today, no matter what your solution is today, whether you have just backups or a full active, going from there to a disaster recovery solution on Oracle Cloud, can that actually deliver a lower cost solution but with better capabilities? And what we've found is that when you compare that with on-premise solutions, in general, the savings could be somewhere between 30 and 60%. Of course, we'll have to identify specific savings for every customer depending on their footprint, number of applications, size of application, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. The like-for-like architecture is, if you are an Oracle customer that is using Oracle database for PeopleSoft applications and or using Oracle engineered systems like Exadata, then Oracle is the only cloud that can provide you the complete like-for-like architecture for your disaster recovery environment on cloud. So with other clouds, you will not have that capability. And then security and compliance, we spoke about that a little while ago, is extremely important. So ensuring that your DR site is fully capable, is cost efficient, but also secure, auditable, and meets all of your compliance requirements, that is important to consider as well. Oracle offers all of these things. Now, here are some more details on the economics of Oracle Cloud. We are doing a comparison between Oracle and on-premise and Oracle and AWS. Now, you may say, why AWS? Why not Azure? Why not GCP? AWS features in a lot of our discussions and a lot of the comparisons. So this is some data we have from Oracle on what that looks like. And you'll see that, in general, and these are some averages, of course, Oracle versus on-premise for different types of solutions can be, somewhere between 38 and 56%. And with AWS also, the comparisons are different. Now, these are, I forgot to add that, on the top line, there's a 38% less for on-premise and 44% less for AWS. That is the active stack that they're comparing. Then there's the active passive, then there is the warm standby, and then there's the backup related stuff. So you have the ability to compare all of this on your own, but we have some comparisons pre-built for you that may help you make your decision. And then Oracle Cloud, we spoke about why PeopleSoft on Oracle Cloud is moving PeopleSoft to OCI, the right solution for you, why are customers doing that. All of this was covered in the keynote. But if you're looking at Oracle databases, real application clusters, you can use DataGuard, which is now built into the platform service for Oracle Database Cloud Service. And it's very easy to configure. And once you set it up, it's fully automated, and you can replicate your database and your PeopleSoft stack along with that. Okay, so now let's talk about disaster recovery slightly differently, right? So far what we've spoken about is what is disaster recovery? What qualifies as a true DR solution? What are some of the key acronyms and metrics associated with disaster recovery? The different types of DR solutions that you can implement, from active, and all the way down to just backups. And then what are some of the things you can implement on Oracle Cloud for disaster recovery for PeopleSoft applications? So disaster recovery as a service is something that a lot of customers are looking forward to. And I'm sorry, I'm going to take a quick break and have a drink. I've been talking since 7:30 my time, so that was helpful. So disaster recovery, customers are now looking for disaster recovery not just as a technology solution, but they are looking for disaster recovery as a service. And disaster recovery as a service means it's a fully implemented, fully managed service that includes implementation, includes maintenance, includes DR testing, and the security elements, and provides an SLA for RPO and RTO, all by a managed service provider like Astute, as opposed to you buying all of these things and implementing it and taking the overheads of maintaining that. So what is disaster recovery solution? Disaster recovery does not have to be about technology alone. You want disaster recovery as a service that you can hold a partner accountable for, and at the same time leverage all of the automation and IT that they've built around disaster recovery. So first and foremost, it's a productized offering. So disaster recovery for PeopleSoft on Oracle Cloud, for example, is a productized offering by Astute Business Solutions. It's a fully managed service, and we call it plug and play because for us to set up DR from the time you say go, it's a matter of days. And then from that point on, we leverage several tools in our arsenal and tools and utilities that Oracle provides us to build that and maintain that in a fully automated manner for you. The second thing is it is as a managed service, as a fully managed service, all costs included. infrastructure, platform, licenses, operational support, maintenance, testing. When you put all of those costs in, it is very cost effective. And we have found that it is up to 50%, in some cases maybe even more, but at least up to 50% cheaper than on-premise VR. And we can certainly compare that with other clouds as well, if that's what you're looking for. And the third most important factor here for disaster recovery as a service is it is efficient, which means that it is built on an automation platform that is specifically built for disaster recovery, not a generic multi-purpose infrastructure solution. And it includes maintenance and the DR testing along with the DR test plan. If you remember what I said earlier, disaster recovery, having the tools, procedures, and plans to execute a full solution is really critical. So having a DR plan that's built into your managed service is going to be really critical, and that's what we offer. Now for PeopleSoft, because of our experience with PeopleSoft and because all of the advantages we get with Oracle Cloud for PeopleSoft, we have pre-built solutions that include architectures, plans, and procedures that make PeopleSoft disaster recovery on OCI very efficient. If you call us and say, hey, I have one application and it has so many app and web servers, this is the size of our database, we can instantly put that into a number of different templates that we have, which we call feature templates. And we can tell you what the cost of your fully managed disaster recovery solution would be. From the time we start to the time we move it to cloud, implement DR, have the standby system operating fully synchronized and maintained, it's a matter of days for us. And in some cases, even in just a few days, within a week, where we can get the system up and running. And as I said, it's a fraction of the cost for disaster recovery. I want to mention that the automation platform that we use for this disaster recovery as a service solution is one that is provided by Rackware. And Rackware is an Oracle ISV partner. Astute has a strong partnership with Rackware. We have delivered disaster recovery and cloud migration automation solutions to a number of our PeopleSoft customers. So Rackware builds and maintains the platform for disaster recovery that helps us automate the process. And Astute uses that to provide the fully managed disaster recovery as a service solution to our PeopleSoft customers. Now, disaster recovery, all of you may be thinking, well, today we're talking about PeopleSoft, but I just want to put it out there that disaster recovery is just not for PeopleSoft. If you are an Oracle customer and you may, as several of you have, PeopleSoft for HR and Oracle EBS for financials, or you have PeopleSoft for HR and JD Edwards as your financials and supply chain system. We see these combinations out there. So you can really think of disaster recovery as a service for any application, whether it's Oracle applications, Oracle databases only, not for Oracle applications, as some of you as PeopleSoft customers may have Oracle as your database for PeopleSoft applications, but you may also have other Oracle databases that you use for other critical workloads which may require disaster recovery. And then for your non-Oracle applications, if you have Windows and Linux-based workloads that are catering to custom applications or any other requirement in your business that need disaster recovery as a service solutions on Oracle Cloud can be applied to all of those types of workloads. So it's important to understand that it's not just for PeopleSoft. The platform, the service we have is truly enterprise-wide, org-wide DR. We're working on several projects where we're moving hundreds of workloads into the cloud for disaster recovery solutions. And PeopleSoft is not always a starting point, although we would love to do a PeopleSoft DR solution for you. If you're not quite ready for that, or if you already have that taken care of, and if your DR needs are in custom applications or just general purpose Windows, Linux workloads, or Oracle databases only, we have as-a-service solutions for all of those. Okay, so let's talk about a customer success story because it's important to put all of this in context. It's one thing to have the technology and the solutions in place, but it's completely different when you hear customers adopting the solution and benefiting from it. So Gallaudet University is a customer of Astute that decided to lift and shift their PeopleSoft applications to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And they checked several of the business drivers, if I can say, that checklist of aging data center hardware, failing HVAC systems, causing outages, power outages, reliant on consulting labor to maintain and manage their PeopleSoft environment. They wanted to get away from all of that and provide one, modern infrastructure, and two, reliable services to support and maintain PeopleSoft. So theirs was lift and shift for some of their PeopleSoft applications. So HR and finance was already on version 9.2, fairly current on PeopleTools and Images, whereas Campus Solutions was on version 9.0 and required an upgrade to the latest PeopleTools version, application version, and Image update. So we did a move and improve for that application. But once PeopleSoft was on OCI, we went back to Gallaudet and said, listen, now we have a disaster recovery solution based on the Rackware platform that we would like to implement for you. And of course, from their standpoint, it was risk avoidance, right? Having robust cloud infrastructure that is highly available and fault tolerant was important. But at the same time, it was also important to protect against natural disasters and human-induced disasters. So the challenge was to really build a plan that not only met their technical and business requirements, but also worked with them during a COVID year amidst unprecedented budget challenges. So it had to be a low-cost solution while it was still delivering the necessary features and capabilities. And we were able to do that by using Rackware, which gave us the automation power to do that very quickly. As a matter of fact, in this case, because this customer is already on OCI, for us to set up the DR for all three applications on OCI using Rackware took us just 24 hours. Now, our teams partnered with Rackware and did work around the clock to make that happen, but we wanted to try and prove a point with this automation platform, and we wanted to push the boundaries of the solution to see how quickly we could implement this, and truly we were able to get this done in 24 hours or less. And that was a huge success for us and for Gallaudet University. So now they have a defined RTO and RPO with an SLA for those as part of our managed services, and then Rackware continues to provide the automation platform for that. Right? Now, for those of you customers who are interested in taking some next steps with us on disaster recovery, this is something that we announced late last year. We call this our 2020 vision offer for disaster recovery. And what it gives you is for a fixed fee of $20,000 per year. It's an annual fixed fee. You get a fully managed disaster recovery as a service solution on Oracle Cloud for PeopleSoft applications. It includes a disaster recovery cloud workshop to help you understand and prioritize your workloads and to help you pick the right solution. Do you want an active solution with zero data loss and zero recovery time, or are you willing to adopt a slightly lesser solution because of the cost parameters and risk parameters that you are willing to entertain? So those are the discussions we'll have with you. We'll talk about what that roadmap to cloud looks like, what is the architecture on cloud that is best suited for disaster recovery, and if you'd like to expand that conversation and talk about not just disaster recovery, but also migrating PeopleSoft production and non-production workloads to cloud, as we've done for many customers, we can certainly expand the scope of that workshop. And then once we get past that, we go work with you on design. We use all of our templates and automation, but tailor it to your specific needs. And then we go about securing your new cloud tenancy and configuring it. We apply the automation with Rackware to migrate the application. And in this case, this offer is for one application. If you have multiple PeopleSoft applications, as many of you do, the offer easily can be multiplied and expanded to those applications as well. It includes a full year of managed disaster recovery as a service. And when I say managed disaster recovery as a service, it includes maintenance, it includes the automation platform, it includes a DR test plan, and it includes one annual test of failover and failback for that disaster recovery system. It also includes all of the necessary cloud infrastructure and platform credits to run that disaster recovery application in the cloud. So Oracle Cloud infrastructure costs and the managed service costs, extremely attractive offer for $20,000. And we guarantee that that disaster plan and the disaster solution will be implemented in less than 2 weeks for you once you select the solution. A little bit more detail on what's involved in the workshop, in the cloud architecture, in cloud migration. We also provide some free training along with that because we want you to understand what you're getting. Although we are going to be your managed service partner, and we provide a fully managed service by giving you information on OCI and how it works, we may be able to prepare you for some other workload migrations in the future. So all of these things are included in that 2020 offer. So that's all I had for today. If you have any questions, you can contact us. I think I'm getting done a little ahead of schedule, but if there are any questions from the audience, I'll be happy to take those now. And please use the chat feature in GoToWebinar to post your questions, and I'll be happy to take your questions and answer them.
Great. Thanks, Arvind. And I would like to remind everybody that they can certainly put their questions in the questions section of the control panel. As we're kind of waiting for those to come in, Arvind, I was thinking about a question that we always get from the Appsian ERP security standpoint, and that's disaster recovery through the frame of a phishing attack, a data breach. I mean, what are some of those early first step remediation type tactics that you recommend people to really start doing when they've identified that there's likely been a data breach?
Well, if they don't have a disaster recovery solution already in place or a robust security solution, and we know Appsian is a leader in that space, if they don't have these things in place, obviously you are working from a position of disadvantage, I would say. But one of the most important things when we think about disaster recovery is to not let that threat or that hack or breach of your systems bleed into your standby environments, your backups, or your disaster recovery environment, or your secondary location that you have. And we call that an air gap solution, right? So if the attack is able to permeate all of your infrastructure and also hit your secondary systems, wherever they may be, then there's really not much value in that disaster recovery solution. So the security protocols have to be applied such that you have an air gap system, and these two systems are separated in that sense. They're still connected to sync data and ensure that your standby system gives you the solution that you desire, but you have to be able to air gap that, applying a number of different technologies that we can suggest to make that happen. Now, from a prevention standpoint, of course, there are a number of things that you could do proactively to avoid being in that situation altogether. It may not be impossible to avoid, but you can certainly use tools that are provided by Oracle Cloud. There are several cloud-native mechanisms, encryption that is built into the database, into storage, into networking, and so on and so forth. Cloud monitoring tools that are available, intrusion detection and prevention solutions that are available. All of this constitute a full security solution, and these are all important elements to consider.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, since we just have a couple minutes left, if you want to go ahead and if there are any parting thoughts that you have, and then you can turn it back to me to wrap everything up.
Yeah, I think the parting thought here is that if you thought disaster recovery was complicated and expensive and difficult to implement, hopefully what I've shared with you today changes your perspective, and you can think of cloud as a way to simplify your disaster recovery solution, but at the same time get more value, get more features, and get a fully managed service. If you're interested in learning more about this, we have several blog articles and white papers and ebooks on disaster recovery. And I have some links here on the slide, so you can go to our disaster recovery solution page, and from there you can find a lot of other information. If you're interested in our 2020 offer, you can write to info@psastute.com, and one of us will get in touch with you, set up a meeting, and share all the details related to that solution. With that, I thank you again for your time and your investment in this process and for listening to this presentation. I hope you have a good time with the rest of the sessions today and tomorrow at the Appsian Innovation Summit.
All right. Thank you, Arvind. Thank you so much. Arvind was a huge part of the keynote as well. So if he's been talking for the last 3 hours straight, it's all my fault. But I certainly appreciate it, Arvind. I would definitely encourage everyone to go to beastute.com Astute Business Solutions is a great partner for Appsian, and we appreciate their participation in the summit. I would definitely like to mention that if everyone could keep their eye on their email on Friday, we will be sending out a survey email that will help us determine our programming for the next session. And I would certainly encourage everybody to, and when I say session, I mean the next summit, excuse me. I would also encourage everyone to follow Appsian on LinkedIn. You can get some additional information very quickly about new summits as they come about. And lastly, for this current summit, we do have a Slack channel that we have opened, and you can get to that from psftsummit.slack.com. Highly encourage everybody to join the conversation there. We will have about a 15-minute break, and then we're going to continue talking about PeopleSoft data risks. Appsian's own Greg Wentz is going to be doing a great presentation called Appsian Data at Risk, Security, Privacy, Compliance, and Everything in Between. That's going to be at the bottom of the hour. Anybody who is concerned about security risks, compliance risks, data privacy risks, there obviously is a zillion of them out there, would highly, highly encourage you to attend that session. It will be a great one. We'll get some hands-on useful tools to take back for your risk mitigation and management efforts as well. So until then, everybody take a quick break, and we will see you all in about 15 minutes. Stick around. We'll be right back.